Ashley, so far we only have, I see, two council members.
You are correct. I just reminded Councilman Colazzo as well as Councilwoman Ruano that we were starting at 6:30.
Okay.
I had spoke to them earlier today and they had confirmed that they would be participating.
Yeah, I saw your email from earlier. I think there's only one that said was unable to make it, so we should have six tonight.
Correct.
Okay, it's still early.
All right.
Council members Rodriguez and Dieguez, we're at 6:36. It's up to you if you guys want to, we can get started, or if you prefer to wait on some of your colleagues, we can do that.
No, I say we wait.
Okay.
If they said they're gonna be here, that's fine.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know if Ashley's maybe heard back from them at all as far as their ETA, but yeah, I'm fine with waiting.
Okay, we'll hang on then. Just wanted to run it by you.
Thank you.
The mayor is not going to be able to attend the meeting in the beginning, but vice mayor's logging on right now to start it.
Thank you, Ash. Ashley, any word back from council members Collazo or Ruano?
I haven't
Okay.
heard back.
All right.
Councilman Collazo is going to be logging on now.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Ruano is going to be logging on now.
Yes, and I'm on the call now, actually.
Vice Mayor, are you there?
Yes, sir. I'm here.
The mayor, I think, is going to be a little delayed joining us.
Okay.
So when Council Member Ruano comes on, I think that's going to be your starting lineup for the night.
Okay. Do you need me to do anything else for right now? Or we're in a...
No, just we can get it started and, once Council Member Ruano is on. She's the last we're expecting.
Okay. All right. No problem. Let me know. I'm gonna. My battery's running low, so I'm gonna just. I'm gonna be here, and I'll have my headset on. Okay.
Gotcha. Herman, let me know when Councilmember Ruano is logged on. I don't see her name yet on the list of participants.
Will do. Okay, Mr. Peterman, she's joining right now.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Councilmember Ruano, I see your name there.
Hi. How
Are you with us? Good.
Just got to the office. I'm sorry I'm late.
That's all right. That's all right. So, Vice Mayor, I think everybody who's going to be able to be with us here at the start is on. So if you don't mind, I'll get everything going. Carlos, is there anything you wanted to say before Elizabeth goes through her presentation?
Yeah, sure, Mr. Manager. I was gonna open it up, but if, do you have anything, you have anything to say? You want me?
No, it's in your hands.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, Vice Mayor and council members. Carlos Acosta, Public Works Director, and I'm here today with Elizabeth Treadway from Wood, which is a consulting firm that was retained to conduct the stormwater program utility fee. As you recall, back in May 12, 2020, we conducted an initial workshop to share with you all some findings and to gain some feedback on changes that may impact the stormwater program. Based on the feedback that you all provided in the May 12 meeting, the town manager and staff gathered with Elizabeth. In the last few months, we've taken that feedback and finalized the report, which was provided as part of this workshop. And Elizabeth will walk us through the 4 different options that we put together to fund a capital program or propose to fund a capital program and address the operation and maintenance needs in the future as well. So pending any questions, what I'll do, I'll just pass it over to Elizabeth to start the presentation. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, Carlos. And again, thank you for allowing me to do this presentation. Would love to have been there with you. Would love that we would all be back together again, but unfortunately we get to do this virtually one more time. It's been a pleasure being able to work with your staff and to be able to put this presentation together and the report that we presented. So we're going to basically spend just a few minutes in the beginning, knowing that you're broadcasting this in various media, just to remind everyone where we were in May. As Carlos said, we did a workshop then and presented various findings and had great discussion, feedback from you. And I'm just going to go through a little bit about the things that we talked about then, but then go much more into the options that we have evaluated since that time, really to focus heavily on the capital program. Again, I think you have had the opportunity in the report itself. I am the team lead on behalf of our company. It's always a team that does this kind of work. Again, a pleasure, and thank you for the opportunity to do this for you. As I shared in May, we work through a very deliberate process. We look at the program, we use all the existing information that you have. We talk with staff about needs, deficiencies, things that need to be addressed, challenges that are facing the community for your stormwater program. And that then feeds into all of the cash analysis that we need to complete in order to look at a rate restudy. We look at policy, we look at your cash flow. We understand then what the options are for your capital program. And as Carlos said, we looked at 4 different ways of really considering this going forward. When I met with you in May, we talked about the program goals that we discussed with staff. These are the things that drive the ultimate analysis of how operations is carried out today. We understand the need, and certainly some of the photographs that have been shared with me help demonstrate the kinds of challenges that the community is facing when the drainage system is not performing optimally to allow you to protect property, to protect roadways, to reduce the kinds of floods that are occurring evidently fairly routinely, and to make sure that there's a sustainable asset management program. And so again, we focus very much on the assets in this next analysis that we're about to talk about. When we initially worked with Carlos and team, we talked about service delivery goals, how the operating program is carried out on a day-to-day basis, what your obligations are for your water quality program. And we also talked about financing goals. What are the optimal solutions? How do you reinvest in this infrastructure? The infrastructure is important to sustaining quality of life in your community, and to really understand then what are those optimal solutions in the long term, not just short-term fixes, but how do we address strategies that really take the program to a different level of performance? So one of the things that we covered before were basic program enhancements. The idea that you have really a terrific study in the update of your master plan. It focuses on several areas within the community, but we recognize that it's not only investment in capital that's important. It's important to sustain this operation of protecting this drainage network in an ongoing manner. So we looked at various operating enhancements as well. I built into the cost model your long-term renegotiation, for example, of outsourced services and contracts that you have to be sure that you're fiscally sound as you go forward, recognizing that in the renegotiation process, you can assume there will be the need for adjustments of pricing, perhaps changes in level of service. And so we took all those things into consideration. But as I said before, what we really have been emphasizing in this next round of analysis is that capital program that manages the asset in the long term. So we're going to get into that detail pretty seriously. One of the things that came up in our discussion in May was a question that was asked, had the rate merely been adjusted, and I don't mean merely in a small way, but had been adjusted to take into account the impacts of inflation over time, because the rate has been stable since its adoption at $4.50 a billing unit per month. I ran a scenario, and I put that up on the screen for you to see what would have happened had it fluctuated by the consumer price index. Today, you would be coming into 2020 at about $6.08. Obviously, those numbers probably would have been rounded up. But that creates an annual revenue estimate of about $1.5, $1.6 million. Your current revenue is just over $1 million. So you can see that you have 48, 49% adjustment that would have occurred over time by adjusting the rate annually to the consumer price index. So there has been erosion of spending power, and recognizing that that adjustment is one approach to managing your rate. Carlos and staff directed me to do a couple of different ways to look at these rates. And so we'll talk about that. How do we accommodate the impact of inflation? One of the other things we've talked about in May was the outsourcing of various operations. And so recognizing that it is ongoing maintenance that needs to partner with capital investment, one of the operating strategies that I included in the rate models was to bring in-house additional resources for maintenance of the system. That could be outsourced, but I priced it as an addition of 2 staff members, some additional equipment, some ancillary supporting costs, things like fuel, so that you could judge, should you choose to outsource, what the potential cost would be if it were being done in-house. Some of those goals that are reinforced in the operating program that we discussed and put forward, maintaining your community rating system for flood insurance protection for your community, making sure that you're responsive to community issues as they come up routinely, and really to mitigate the impacts of rain events with a focus on flood reduction. So as we talked in May, that plays into then what does the financial model look like? So in the financial model, one of the things that I built in was an operating reserve. An operating reserve can protect you against a major swing, for example, in inflation. We have certainly seen this country face double-digit inflation over time, and hope that we don't go back to those kinds of days ever. But having an operating reserve can protect you against those kinds of variations in cost over time. And so it's important to have that discussion in any decision that you make going forward, I built an operating reserve into the program. Tonight, we're going to talk about debt financing. We have a couple of different strategies for managing your capital program that we're going to talk about in greater detail. And two of those strategies are really dependent on issuing debt. And so I have run analyses on the potential of using debt for major capital investments. One of the other issues is this issue of rate stability. Do you want to be able to sustain a rate consistent over time? And if so, then how do we adjust that within the cost model in order to ensure that we're not seeing the erosion of buying power that certainly has occurred over the last 15, 16 years? And so we'll talk a little bit about what those policy issues are and how they might impact the decision as you go forward. One of the other things that always comes up as we're talking about rate adjustments, as we're establishing new utilities, is the comparison that you have against peer communities. And this chart gives you a wide range of communities, all within your area, that allow you to see where you stand today from a cost perspective on a billing unit, $4.50 per month. I would caution you about this kind of data because what it doesn't tell you is what are they doing with the money that they have? What are the challenges that they're facing? Do they have the same need to reinvest in your infrastructure, for example? Are they meeting their water quality commitments, and do they have a permit, and is it required? How frequently are they addressing maintenance issues? Those questions are not there in comparative data, but it does give you a benchmark to see where you currently sit in neighboring communities from a cost perspective to the community itself. So let's talk more about the 4 program levels of service. In working with staff and leadership, we developed a very different strategy for your capital program. The operating program that we discussed in May is still the operating program that I analyzed within these new scenarios. The major change in these scenarios is the capital investment program. Now, 2 of those strategies also include additional staff. And I'll share with you where that is in the overall program and in the cost analysis. But we developed 4 different financing plans for 2 different capital investment strategies. The first is a community-wide capital program. And working with Carlos and his staff, we established that value of needed improvement in just over a $54 million investment program. That investment program includes not only the capital construction costs, but certainly the design, construction management, inspection, the oversight of that as well. So it is a complete cost, not simply the cost of construction of a capital project. The other strategy that we evaluated was taking the 2019 master plan projects with some additional key priority projects identified by the Public Works operation as a comprehensive capital program as well. I will say the community-wide capital program does include the 2019 master plan. So these are not separate in that the community-wide, obviously at $54 million, is quite significant compared to about a $15 million program that would address the 2019 master plan and key priority projects. This map, this overview of the community, gives you a sense in the community-wide capital program where the investment strategies would be targeting. So this is color-coded. The green area is the master plan area. So where you see the green shaded parts of the community, those are within the master plan. The gold shaded areas are the additional areas of investment that would be made under the community-wide program. And we've highlighted as well the purple areas that have projects that are either recently completed or are ongoing. So this gives you a sense when we talk about community-wide, the breadth of the investment strategies that would be involved in managing a $54 million investment program. The investment program then is translated into projects. And the projects in this particular distribution recognize that there is great variability in their costs. And so these are not necessarily prioritized by importance. What we did at this point was to try to develop a relatively smooth capital cost over time, with the exception of 1 year, and that's FY 30 or 24, 25, 30. My goodness, I'm getting way ahead of myself. Because there's an $8.8 million project there, the total for that 1 year is quite significant. So it's quite a large investment in the project that's at Royal Gardens Estates. Should your strategy that you would like to pursue be the community-wide, then certainly the public works staff has to roll up their sleeves and refine these numbers, really put them in a way that, again, is manageable, a number of projects that can be handled. One of the things I mentioned was there is an impact to the operating costs when you have an aggressive capital program. It takes staff to be able to manage contractors, contracts, inspection, insurance that the projects are executed as desired. And so in this particular scenario, there are 2 additional staff members that I put in the operating program. One a public works engineer and one a public works manager. Did I get that right, Carlos? I don't have that sitting right in front of me. I apologize.
No, that's correct. That's
There are
correct.
2 key staff members that would be needed. One that must continue and make sure that ongoing operations are not lagging behind. You need to make sure you're still performing for all of the community while you have a key leader to really make sure the capital program is invested in. So there is some additional operating costs that are actually included in the analysis for this scenario. But as you can see, this is a significant investment to really tackle the issues around your community in a very deliberate and a very important asset management perspective. We then also looked at the master plan at a almost $15.5 million program. In this case, these projects are being shown in a prioritization order that your public works staff put together. This addresses, again, both construction, design, the construction oversight inspections, those key services that are critically important to ensuring that you can execute this. So these are the 2 major investment strategies that were evaluated, and we evaluated them in different funding methodologies. So we're going to jump right into how we tackled this major capital investment strategy. One option is to fund all operating costs and bond the community-wide capital program. In this case, your community-wide capital program would be fully under construction within a 9-year period. This would have a significant impact, obviously, on the community and solving drainage issues and problems. and would indeed incorporate the need for issuing debt. In the way that I financed it, we'll talk about how I treated that in the models. We also looked at funding the operating and bonding the master plan and key priority projects. In this case, the capital improvement program and the model that I built would be completed, everything under construction, within 5 years. The difference in timing is the bond market issue. And I'll talk a little bit more about why the bond market has an impact then on the capital planning within your program. We also took a step back to the model that we presented in May and said we would fund the operation. We would not try to tackle the community-wide under this scenario. We would focus on the master plan, but we would set aside a local funding match. In this case, the value was set at $500,000 a year to be able to competitively go after larger grant offerings so that your capital program would be funded only when grants are received. So the timeline for achieving that master plan is unknown. It would be based on your competitive nature and being able to go after grants. The fourth option we looked at was funding your operating program and the master plan and key priority projects totally with utility revenue only, all cash. Again, we would use the prioritized capital improvement program, all under construction within 9 years. So these are very different strategies. They offer you some significant options to think about and consider as you go forward. And I built a rate model to analyze all of these. So let's talk more in detail about some of the principles that I used in being able to build the rate models. So one of the principles was ensuring that the operating and what capital strategy could be covered with revenues from the utility. So in the two bonding of the capital programs, the revenues are sufficient to pay the bonded principal and interest payments. In the grant approach, those revenues are sufficient to support an aggressive grant strategy. And of course, in the all cash strategy, 100% of the cost are intended to cover both operating and the capital program with utility revenue. When I analyzed the bond market and the potential for issuing bonds, I used a 30-year payback period for the capital value of your projects with a 3.5% interest. That's very competitive today, in fact. We've seen bonds now getting even a lower interest rate in the market. And again, it covers all of the cost of your capital program, not only the construction. An additional strategy that I used was to stabilize the rates over a study period. To do that, to show a consistent rate, which is what you've used over the last 16 years, I built inflation into your operating costs. So there are two strategies you could use: fix your operating cost and let inflation have a change in your rates from year to year, or build a reasonable inflation factor looking historically over the last 20, 25 years, and build that into your cost model so that the rates themselves can cover that anticipated inflation and be stable over time. And so that's what you're going to see when we talk about the rates themselves. So I've accounted for inflation within the operating expense within the cost model. And so this is the outcome. Now, in the study document itself in the report, the models that are predicting all of this are presented to you. It gets kind of messy to try to walk through all of those things. And so I built this table as a way that we could compare them. So option 1 on the community-wide program would have you starting rates. You're now at $450. It would be quite a significant increase to $1,350 in FY 2021. And I used the study period starting with your new fiscal year through 29 that would establish 2 different rates over that time period. The first 4 years stable at $1,350. A second bond issue would occur in really late FY 24 into the early 25 that would cause a rate increase up to $2,150 per billing unit on a monthly basis. So that over time, with a 30-year payback, you can see the pressure of obviously debt service on rates, but it would allow you to have this very comprehensive investment strategy built into your program, again, stabilizing rates, covering your operating costs, accounting for inflation pressures on operating costs, and capitalizing your program through debt.
Elizabeth,
Yes,
can I interrupt them for a second with the?
absolutely.
This is Ed Peterman, the town manager.
Uh-huh.
Your table here, your spreadsheet only goes through the rates as of 28, 29.
They do.
What happens after 29? Does it continue at that last rate until the bonds are paid off?
It's really driven by 2 things at that point. And certainly one of our recommendations always is you want to do a restudy of your rates periodically. You don't want to wait until 28, 29 to look at them. But 2 things will happen as you complete this major investment. Obviously, the debt service remains. What is variable is what other capital projects come up that weren't anticipated. So a major capital infrastructure, be it roads, be it sewer lines, be it storm drain lines, the major capital is ongoing, but certainly not this aggressively. So you'd want to be looking at what additional projects are still sitting in front of you to be completed as you're approaching those outer years. And the evaluation of what pressures are put on the operating system with the new investment that has taken place in infrastructure. So I can't tell you exactly what would happen because we'd have to build the optional scenarios, but you certainly would have that continuing debt service that would be required to be paid.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Uh-huh. And that's true of all these models. So that this does not, it's not just sensitive to the fact that you have bonded debt in the first 2. All of them are really driven around what additional impacts are there to your capital needs, what additional projects will come up, and what operating strategies will need to be adapted to in order to continue to deliver the performance that you want from this system. So when we look at option 2, this is the debt issued for the master plan program. In this case, the debt would be issued in FY 2021. It would allow you to get your capital program, and the bond market is very sensitive to you holding on to cash and not using it. So I used a 5-year build out period because it's fairly typical we see in infrastructure for drainage, water, sewer, that they want projects moving. You're not building a building, but you're definitely going to be very sensitive to the bond market's reaction to how long it will take you to build the infrastructure that they are investing in and holding basically as assets to the debt that's issued. So I used a 5-year implementation strategy for that program. Obviously, it can be sensitive to when you choose to issue debt, but in this case, I tried to keep things equal so that these things are comparable to each other. So in this case, the debt gets issued early. It is a sustained rate over time. You still have the same 30-year payback period. It's on a $15.5 million bond. It's a single bond issue, and it has within it then the continuing support for operations, and it reflects, I think, very comparatively to your community-wide program, with one exception. There will be ongoing capital issues that will come up in other parts of the community that are not addressed under the master plan. So one is much more comprehensive in addressing capital needs. The second is dependent upon the master plan recommendations from your 2019 report. When you look at option 3, now we go back to a program that's depending on grants. And so this is taking the operating program and adding a $500,000 fund that would be annually contributed to, that would be to go aggressively after grant funding for your capital program. So the $8.75 basically reflects a program that is operationally focused with an aggressive grant pursuit. One of the things I talked with your public works staff about was, what if you're not successful with a grant in a particular year, but you've set aside this $500,000 match? There are smaller projects that you could divert that $500,000 to take care of some of the smaller improvements that could be made. So it's not a matter of just building this $500,000 every year and not always being guaranteed that you can get the kind of capital investment money through a grant, but you could be working on smaller projects if you're not successful in any particular year in going after larger grants. And then the very last option is the fee pays for everything. If you get a grant, that would be terrific. If you don't, that's not to worry. Your master plan can be built with cash. And so in this case, in all these scenarios where you see the rates held stable, there is built-in inflation in the operating cost to ensure that you don't erode away your opportunity to be competitive in the marketplace, whether you're talking about employment competition, whether you're talking about pricing of your outsourcing of your contracts. It has built within it that inflationary impact. So that's why you see the rates actually being sustained over a long period of time. But option 4 is all cash. You rely 100% on covering your capital to build the master plan projects and your operating costs on cash only. So these are some very significantly different and variable strategies that you have presented to you in this set of rates that really offer you different options. They can reflect in different ways your ability to be able to tackle the problems that are facing your community when it comes to drainage management and building a sustainable infrastructure over time. The conclusions that we came to in working with staff is important to establish a reserve for operating costs, to protect any variability, any unexpected expense that comes before you, to be able to ensure that you have sufficient cash on hand at any time that you'll be able to sustain your operating maintenance program. Where you're relying on grants, dedicate resources to that so that your staff is in the best competitive position to be able to lobby for, negotiate for, achieve grants to help offset capital costs. I highly recommend that you periodically do a rate study. Even though we've projected these rates to be sustainable over time, you always want to, every 3 or 4 years, test the rate models, test where you are as a community, what may have changed over time. Are there strategies that need to be adjusted? Is there a more aggressive program that's needed in one area, less aggressive in another? It's always a good idea to check into your financial model to make sure that you're using your utility resources to meet really your long-term as well as short-term objectives. The use of capitalizing your CIP through either bonding or being able to establish appropriate financial tests for your capital program, I think are really important. I used a relatively conservative model in establishing your estimates potentially for bonding, but it's always important to really check the way that you capitalize that CIP and how projects will change over time. We can do all the best engineering analysis, but something catastrophic can happen, something can change priorities, and it's really important to be able to know that you've established the sound fiscal policy to be able to capitalize that. And I think it's important that you continue this process of engaging really and informing and educating and outreach of your community to really help them understand, you know, what you're trying to accomplish, the solutions, and they're not easy solutions. They are really requiring a very thoughtful strategy. You have a terrific staff to work with. I want to be able to at least say that while they're there and be able to praise them. I have a lot of fun working with various public works operations around the country. You have a very competent, fun, creative group of folks. And it's been a pleasure really working with them. And I thank them for the opportunity to be able to share this information with you tonight. So that basically, I went through that. I feel like I was a fire hose at you with information. But I think it's important really for you to take on your discussion, feedback, guidance at this point in the strategies. And I'm happy to answer questions. I am sure Carlos and Ed are both right there to do the same. Any thoughts you have, any guidance you may want to offer.
Council members, jump in. If anybody who has any kind of question or needs any clarification or something further explained, just jump.
I just had one question. And
You muted yourself, sir.
oh, I'm sorry. I guess I was trying to be courteous and let anybody else go, but
You just muted yourself again.
sorry. It keeps on happening.
Again.
It keeps on happening. I don't know why my phone continues to go to the mute. So I'm gonna leave it alone and see if this works. This is Luis Palazzo, by the way. Ms. Tidwell, you shared with us a stormwater comparison, and you said that it was a very poor, I guess, barometer, not to gauge our fee or gauge what we set our fee at what other cities have done, because we don't have a comprehensive analysis of their infrastructure or their systems, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. I can't help myself but going back to that slide and just figuring out or trying to figure out without the knowledge that you have or actually an in-depth dive on how some of these cities are kind of doing it. kind of at the same price point that we're at. And then using that gauge, and I know you prefaced your comments, you said, don't use that, don't, compare, because you're not really comparing apples to apples. If we were to start setting the rates, we'd be some of the highest in the county compared to all the municipalities. So I don't know if you've had experience with other municipalities down here, and how have they been able to keep their rates? I guess we're right about the middle of the pack, right?
Mhm.
There's a couple outliers: Village of Key Biscayne, City of Coral Gables, and Village of Pinecrest, which if we were to adopt any of the options provided, would put us at that higher tier. Do you know what these other, maybe what have the other systems have done, or have they been more reliant or more successful on grants? Have they been reinvesting, or maybe they just have the luxury of having more people or more capital to reinvest in? I'm just curious because I find myself going back to that comparable and
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
That I was going to say, if you look at Miami-Dade County, which is just 2 bars to the left, so not having a line drawn right across there, I'm looking at somewhere in the $5 range, perhaps. Miami-Dade County, of course, obviously an extremely large area, but there are communities all within the county. So understanding what their rate structure is based on and who they charge and how large their population of ratepayers is and what their program is responsible for is the way that question would have to be answered. And I can say to you quite honestly, I don't know the programs for all of these communities. What I do know, after 35 years of doing this work, I find that stormwater programs are often woefully underfunded, that the stormwater drainage system is really the third of the major water systems that is getting more attention today than we've seen ever in the past. And so one thing I do know that has happened in the industry is that rates were often set very low to introduce new revenue to a community, to enable a community to begin.
Sorry to interrupt, Dad. I gotta go.
To be able to accomplish certain kinds of things. And when you start low to your needs, it's very difficult over time without a committed strategy to reevaluate, address, do rate updates periodically. The very principles that I talked about, doing your rate model review every 3 or 4 years. Too many of our communities have underfunded their stormwater program for years and continue to do so. That's a generalization. I'm not saying that about any one of these communities that are within your area. I'm saying historically, with all the work I've done all over the United States, it is the one trait that I have found consistently. Programs are not meeting the needs of their infrastructure. And we're seeing now with more aggressive changes in weather patterns, with increased intensity in storms, that drainage systems have been woefully underfunded. And so without being able to do a legitimate benchmark against your sister communities here, I don't know why the rates are where they are. I do know that many of these communities are relatively small in size compared to a major jurisdiction. If you look at Sarasota County, that's rates are in the $90 range. It's a very different pattern that you have, and so I feel terribly inadequate to answer your question, other than anecdotally in what I've seen. I would certainly turn to someone like Carlos, who may have a better feel for the variability in these programs, to be able to give you some legitimate benchmarking kinds of factors.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Well, I would add, and I'm a little familiar with the city of Doral just because I lived there for 5 years and I kind of knew the city. When you look at the city of Doral, the fee is very similar to the one that we have in Miami Lakes. For example, in the city of Doral, you have a lot of private communities, and you know, so when you compare the road mileage, I actually months ago I pulled how much a map of the roads that the city of Doral owns as a public right of way. Much smaller mileage than Miami Lakes because they have a lot of private communities that within those private communities they take care of their stormwater program, stormwater on their own community roads, on their lakes and things like that. So they have, although the rate is the same, they have a less right of way to take care than Miami Lakes. I would assume that if they had the amount of roadway right of way that the town of Miami Lakes had, I would assume that they would have their fee would have to be a little bit higher in order to meet that operating demand. I don't know about the other ones, but I know that about Doral just because I live there and I'm familiar with the city.
May I ask a quick question to Mr.
Mhm.
Acosta?
Yes.
Thank you. Carlos, thank you so much for mentioning that because that was one of the questions that I had written down to ask. For those communities that are private, that will not have drainage improvements in their location, would the fee be the same as those communities that will have drainage improvements? For example, Royal Oaks versus, let's say, Gramercy, for example.
The fee is based, Councilmember Ruano, the fee is based on the ERUs. So everybody will pay, I mean, except for commercial, which has a different, their rate is calculated based on their impervious area and all that, but everybody else pays a set fee. So whatever the fee was to be tomorrow, six or seven, all those single family residential homes will pay that fee, even apartments on a multi-story building.
Okay, so there won't be any variances for communities that will not, for example, these private communities, they are subject to making their own improvements. With their HOA fees, they have to maintain their roads, their drainage systems, et cetera, et cetera. So there's no leeway for us to have separate fees.
The fee will not be variable among the different communities.
Okay, thank you.
Council member, before we leave that topic, just the logic, and Carlos, correct me if I'm wrong, the logic that exists for that is that even people who live in private communities at some point go out of the private communities and drive through the other streets of Miami Lakes. So that is the logic for them to participate in the funding of the stormwater system globally around the town.
Correct, and I appreciate the clarification. The reason why I ask is because many times residents in these communities ask me regarding, tree trimming, road improvements, road resurfacing, and the concept is always that they pay as much into the tax base as everyone else, but they don't receive the same amount of benefit because they are subject to maintaining their own areas. So this was just something that came up to me. In looking through the presentation, I realized that this is another area, right, where these particular homeowners are paying into a system where they're not necessarily going to collect the same amount of improvements that other residents will. But I guess there's no way to adjust for that, and I understand that. Thank you.
I had a couple questions.
Go ahead.
All right. I guess Carlos would be able to tell us. Carlos, what is our ERU right now for the town? How is it? What is it per square footage?
The total number of ERUs that are billed is 21,115. So each single family and an apartment, pays that rate. For commercial, is based on impervious area, and I don't have the the equation that they use right now.
Right, but unless I'm understanding it incorrectly, the ERU, that doesn't mean that we have 21,000 residences. That means that we have, the unit is measured, for example, the counties is something like 1,500 square feet, right? Or isn't that how they measure it?
It's based on square feet. I could look it up in our code, but it's based on square feet. You know, they take a single family lot and say, okay, this is this amount of square feet. So everything like this will be one ERU.
Right. So do you know that number? Could you look that up and get it for me?
Carlos, can I chime in on that for a second, please?
Sure.
Okay, so an ERU is one dwelling. That could be a house, that could be an apartment, that could be a multiplex. So one dwelling is one ERU, which is $4.50. From there, you go into commercial. And in commercial is around 2,600 square feet by ordinance. And that is one ERU. And that includes everything that is impermeable.
Okay, so it's not based on the size or square footage of the unit. It's based on like a folio number. If it's identified with a folio number, it's issued an ERU.
Yes, other than commercial. If it's commercial, then you have the inside and also you have the parking lot. They have to measure all that stuff divided by, again, don't call me, I think it's 2,600 or 2,700.
Right.
And that's
no, I was more concerned about on the residential side, how we calculated the ERUs on the residential side. But if it's based on folio, that's very clear.
Yeah, it's one dwelling. So whether it's a townhouse, an apartment, or whether it's a house could be 10,000 square feet. It's one ERU.
Got it. Okay. The other question I had was on the bonding calculations.
Mm-hmm.
Let me take it back to the chart that you put out.
Mm-hmm.
You had put that there was you're basing it off of a 3.5% interest rate.
Yes.
Is that a fixed rate for the 30-year term?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, the total bond value would be set at the interest rate that you were able to negotiate. In this case, I used a 3.5%. As I say, there are a couple of communities we recently work with that have been able to get a rate even lower than that.
Yeah, I was about to say, because being in, banking, I have seen rates that are dropping significantly lower than that, maybe even half a point to a point lower than that on some really well-secured loans. So, but 3.5, I guess, is a conservative estimate for what you guys were trying to project. And I had one more question regarding.
Hey, council member, before you read that question, because I want clarity, Elizabeth, in the option 1 that has 2 separate issuances of bonds, one now and then 1 4 or 5 years out, obviously second issuance, it would be based on the market rates at that time, right? So
it would. I still use the 3.5. We're not seeing a lot of volatility, and I felt if you were doing a second bond issue based on the success of your first, that you should be able to anticipate that it's going to be within that same range, and so I maintained the 3.5. But you're absolutely right. It will be whatever the competitive rate would be at that time.
Okay, I just wanted everybody to be clear on that. I'm sorry, Councilman.
All right, so with respect to option 3, which is the option where we pay cash plus funded by grants.
Right.
Obviously, that one, you said that you couldn't determine how long it would take to complete because it's solely dependent on how successful we are with the funding of the grants, which, even in a year like this one where we thought we were going to get a significant amount of grant money, we ended up with 0 due to obviously unforeseen circumstances in the budget for the state. But those things happen from year to year, and it's very, very volatile. But on option 4, how long was the completion process? 9 years?
9 years. I use if everyone will tolerate me bouncing this around, I use this same projection for the master plan. If you can see my screen.
Yes, yes,
a
I can.
Prioritized implementation strategy that Carlos and team worked out and presented as the way in which they would sequence projects over time.
Got it. Got
So
it.
it's fairly consistent. The first couple of years have, again, some significant dollar projects, but it's fairly stable when you look at the cost that we built in for these projects over time.
Right. So going off of that chart that you're on right now,
Mm-hmm.
how would we pay, for example, 22, 23, a $3.2 million service charge or construction project charge if we were still charging the same $15 that we were charging in 20 and 21? Is that because the carryover from 20 and 21 would be enough to cover?
Yes. That's how you stabilize the rate over time. So your use of the capital money is variable, but you're bringing in a consistent flow of cash, which means in 1 year you will have a carryover, but you've programmed it purposefully so that that cash is on hand when that larger capital project is needed.
Got it. All right, and taking you back to the first chart, the inflation, is it correct that had we taken the CPI from the beginning,
the very first chart?
we would be at what, $6 now?
$6.08 is what it mathematically calculates out to for 2019. I didn't have a 2020 number yet, so I wasn't able to do a legitimate 2020 analysis, but.
Do you have an estimate of how much annual revenue we lost out on for not doing that?
Oh, you mean over time? I didn't run that over time. I probably.
No, it's okay. I mean,
you'd like to look at that. I probably could do that, but.
Just curious.
But you're certainly knowing where you would be in 2020 is at 1.5, almost 1.6 million compared to where you are, which is just over 1. So,
right. So do the math. It's probably, yeah.
Yeah.
It's probably an average about 450,000 a year over the.
Well, I mean, I don't want to guess at that, but
right. No, I get it.
Certainly a substantially different amount of cash would have come through your revenue stream. Understood. As each year you saw an adjustment.
Understood. Okay. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Councilmember Dieguez, you're the only other council member left here. Any questions?
Yeah. So I just want to take it back as best as we all can to May. Because back then, and there's been a lot that's happened between then and now, and I have my notes from that time in front of me, but I admit they're not the most detailed. But I have here that at that point in time, based on a back and forth that you had with Councilwoman Ruano, that there was talk about a number at $6.75 per ERU.
Correct.
And that would yield, if this is correct, an additional $500,000 every year. Is my understanding of my notes correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And what was the discussion like internally as far as that particular number?
In that case, it was, if everyone will just tolerate me flipping through these slides for a second. In that case, the option that was really being evaluated is option 3.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And it was the master plan. Some of the projects, the public works staff had adjusted between May and now, but fairly similar capital program. The difference in why is this 875 and the previously it was at 670 or 75 is this stabilization of the rate over time. So when I presented it in May, I didn't have a stable rate. I was not showing a fixed rate over this 9-10 year analysis period. I was letting the rate be variable based on spending pattern. But in this particular case, I went ahead and used all of the inflation escalators built right into the model and was able then to show a stable rate over the period. So you would, yes, ultimately comparing apples to apples, the program you saw in May to this program, starting at 670, by adding $2 additional, that's really creating carryover to the next fiscal year to adjust for variability in the cost. And so that was the principle we were talking about just a few minutes ago. These are set at a stable number because you're accumulating excess revenue one year because you know you need it next year. And that way you stabilize the rate.
Yeah, and that's how you pay for the I think it was, yeah, there it is, 22-23, which is the year, if I'm not mistaken, that has the $2 million worth of projects.
Right.
Okay, and my last question then is, all these rates factor in the purchase of a new vac truck, because I have here that we were 8 years into the 12-year life cycle, as well as the MS4 permit study.
Yes. All of the operating strategy is consistent. Yes.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
All right. Carlos, any final thoughts from your perspective? If not, then I'll close out after you're finished.
I'll just add one last thing, and I'm not sure if I heard it. Elizabeth may have added, but when we look at what the way ahead and what we plan, eventually to adopt, let's not forget, that these are what we presented today. We presented a lot of master plan projects, but let's not forget that there are existing infrastructure that 10 years from now, 15 years from now, is going to continue to decay, and infrastructure that will need to be replaced. So while these master plan projects and community-wide projects were presented in a snapshot in time, eventually there will be other projects that we will have to address and operational needs. So I just wanted to add that other piece, and I'll send it back.
Well, actually, Carlos, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I noticed something on that countywide capital investment program map. The east side of the town has very little projects on it. There's one that looks like it's by Glen Eagle. And then there's one on Miami Lakeway South, but that's it. So that's assuming that we're never, we have no need for stormwater on the east side. Well, that may be true right now, but it may not be true in 5 or 10 years. So, kicking the can down the road further is only going to bring up a whole nother bag of issues.
Carlos, if I can interject, and council member, just if you look at the east side and kind of divide it in quadrants with Ludlam Road and then Miami Lakes Drive, the quadrant on the southwest corner, that had, I would say, within the last 3 or 4 years, had significant drainage projects completed in that entire area around Lake Martha and so forth. So I know that because I lived it. So I know that for sure those projects have been completed recently. So that, I think, changes the dynamics there. The Lake Patricia, Lake Catherine area, I'm not really sure, Carlos. I don't know what the history as far as any kind of drainage problems and or projects that we've completed to solve those problems. you know, over the last 5 to 10 years.
That's correct, Mr. Manager. The Lake Sarah, Lake Martha, and actually on Bull Run, there was a project that the town did many years ago as well. So we haven't received that many complaints from the east side, just because those projects were recently completed and have been successful at it. You know, in comparison to the west side, where you have a lot of the bulk of the flooding around town. But you are correct. That doesn't mean that 10 years, 15 years from now, things won't, issues won't arise.
All right, and that was,
Do you know, Carlos?
go ahead, Marilyn.
I'm sorry, Carlos. Do you know why the bulk of the drainage issues are on the west side?
I think certainly one of the issues on the west side is the lack of lakes. When you look at areas like Lake Sarah, the Lake Martha, a lot of those communities have outfalls to those lakes. So water collects in the roadway, they go out and go into these lakes, and these lakes tend to attenuate that volume and absorb that volume. West Lakes doesn't have that. So West Lake, everything that gets on the roadway, it's through French drains. Once those French drains get full, it backs up on the surface. With West Lakes, there was a project done a couple of years ago, which installed a trunk line on 89th Avenue, from 154 all the way past Barbara Goldman into the canal. So the drainage project of West Lake that we will be kicking off pretty soon in September will tie in those side roads into that main trunk line and will discharge to a canal. So that will be key for this project, because you need that outfall. You don't have a lake, but you have to get this water out to a canal. So at least the canal can absorb that volume of water and take it off the street. So that's what I've seen mainly in the Royal Oaks. In the Royal Oaks, where you have 166th Street, 162nd, while you have those lakes there, those lakes don't have outfalls. Don't have outfalls. Many of them, I think there was only one lake there that has a drainage easement when it was developed to allow water to go in, but the other lakes don't have drainage easements, so they cannot discharge in there. So I think that's one of the reasons why you have a lot of flooding on the streets. They're not capable of redirecting that excess rainfall into those lakes.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense, because undoubtedly most of the complaints that we get about flooding are on the west side. So I was just trying to figure out what it was, but that makes total sense. Thank you.
Any other questions? Carlos, were you done? Any final thoughts from you, Carlos? I didn't want to cut you short.
No, I'm good. I'm good, Mr. Manager.
Okay. Then council members, you know, I guess, you know, they've done a great job. Elizabeth and her team, together with our public works staff, has done an incredible job putting these options out here before you. So I guess the most logical question would be, well, what's next? And obviously, you know, just to throw out some ideas for you to consider, one would be do nothing. And then we continue with the problems that we've had. We continue paying the $450. We don't enhance our operations that we needed. And that's obviously always an option, do nothing. The second option would be for one of you as a member of the council to champion one of the recommendations or one of the options, and recommend a change to the rates. And you can do that through a new business item. We can work together, staff and one of the council members, to put together the project and put before your colleagues on the council. And then, you know, as always happens, then it gets debated on the dais, and then it could be changed from there. But so obviously that's an option that any one of you or more than one of you have. You could always bring, even if it relates to the same thing, competing new business items, and we'd be happy to work with any one of you who want to champion one of these new business items for a rate change. The third option, as I see it, would be to have staff put together an item that we could recommend to the council put it before you as a item for your consideration, and then it can get debated and sliced and diced, amended, changed, whatever on the dais, and we can do it that way. So I saw those as the three most obvious options. I'm not saying that they're the only options. But if we do nothing, we could also say, hey, now is not the time. We can revisit this in X number of months. What I wouldn't want to do is to have that open-ended forever. So my recommendation is if we decide that right now, because of things that are going on, is not the time, I would recommend that we have a time certain to reconsider this, because the problems, and you guys know it better than me. I get the calls from you, but you guys field the calls from all the residents. So as this map that's on your screen indicates, there are problematic areas in our town. And following up on what Elizabeth said, historically, many communities have always underfunded this problem. It's something that's kind of, when the sun is shining and there's no problems, then it kind of dies down. So that's, I'll leave it up to you. Would be more than happy to work with any of you if any of you wanted to consider a change. And I foresee those being the next steps. And obviously we'll follow the direction. We're in a workshop environment, so you guys can't really make decisions here today, but you can give us direction, and we'll be more than happy to follow up in a forum like a council meeting that decisions can be made by the council.
I think that you can still, as an administration, put forward your recommendation even now and just have the implementation date be sometime such as next fiscal year. I think that was something that had been raised also in May, as far as because of everything going on with COVID and the fact that it probably, because of what's happening with the restaurant closures and whatnot, would not be the wisest thing perhaps to raise it in this fiscal year, perhaps in the following year, 21-22, have that be the first year that there would be any kind of increase. I think based on the feedback at the last meeting, my view is that there probably would be an appetite to consider an increase at some point in the future. I just don't think that time is now. And further, I think also the amount of the increase is going to be something that would be hotly debated. But I'll save that for when we actually get to a meeting in which we will discuss that. But I just think the administration can go ahead and put forward the options out there to be voted on. At that point, we'll chew it up, in a full-blown meeting, and just, whatever option comes out of it, of course, outside of it staying flat, whatever option were to come out of it, would be something that can be the implementation that can be put into the future to account for, the loss of jobs in the community. Because I think even this fee, if we were to jump to option one in particular, putting aside whatever concerns might be about a 30-year debt burden, I think the increase there is substantial enough that every, to pay that increase every month could be an issue. So, especially on those that are hardest hit. So with that said, I think that's another opportunity available to you as far as, having a delayed implementation date while we have that discussion, though, in the near future.
We'd be more than happy to bring before you at a council meeting a recommended option, and obviously understanding the condition we're all going through now. So, the timing and the fiscal years that Elizabeth laid out, obviously by pushing them out, a few months or even a whole fiscal year, but it still gets the program revised. It still gives us a path forward to solve the problems so many of our residents have with drainage.
Mr. Manager, one last thing, and you know how much I love hybrids. One of the models I didn't see was when at least on the one that's completely dependent on grants, or we've had a great track record. In the last 2 years, I would agree with Councilman Rodriguez. not so much with relying on state funding to get grants, but we've had a grants department that's done a good job in getting grants at times. I didn't see a model, or maybe Ms. Sidwell can orient me to, if on the projections, if we were to get grants or we were to be able to accelerate some of those projects, I didn't see any rate reduction or rate adjustment for that. And I know it's a variable that's unknown, but is there sensitivity to that in any of your projections or any of your models if we were to perform more aggressively in obtaining those funds or not? I only saw, you know, the flat rate model, but is there anything that could bring it back if we were to outperform our current projections?
I think what's important in that question is that issue of consistently looking at your rates on an annualized basis, so that if you are, you know, truly successful in being able to bring in the cash that will allow you to offset, then you're in the position, there's no question, in the position to look at your rates in a different way. We did not include those kinds of changes in the models that we were building based on these various scenarios, but it does indeed speak to that need that you're consistently evaluating that revenue and the methodologies that you're able to raise various cash with. So I certainly recognize that that is an unknown, and it will always be sitting there as an unknown. One of the other principles that I would just share with you that I often hear from the business side of most communities is to have predictability. And so a rate that moves up and down, where their ability to predict their own operating costs becomes difficult to forecast. I would just caution to be careful about a highly volatile kind of rate in respect to the kind of feedback I've gotten over the years from the business and industry community.
Council member, following up on what Elizabeth said, and she said it multiple times in her presentation, is the periodic rate study that would be done. So if we are fortunate enough to be hyper aggressive and secure funding opportunities or funding from grants or from other governmental entities like the state, and then we could, during that rate study period, is when we could reassess our projected program, and then it could be, you know, tweaked at that time and built in.
Yeah, let me, and I know Josh, Councilman Dieguez put some of his sentiment on the table, and I'm going to be quite honest with you. I'm in sticker shock. I was more around, I was expecting something based on our last conversation of, you know, 6 and change, 675, I think is what he had in his notes. And I have to go back to see. And I was comfortable with adding actually something to adjust for inflation over time. And I kind of agree with some of the sentiments. You know, I think we've been kind of trying to swim upriver on something that's very difficult to control. And we ourselves have been eroding our ability to address the needs of our system over time because there hasn't been a lot of adjustment to that rate. I do, when I saw 875 or 850 being on the low end, it's a significant, going back to your comments about predictability. We're doubling basically, you know, so it's sticker shock. And in some situations, I think we're even almost quadrupling the rate that we have now. So I'm trying to be sensitive to that, and I'm trying to wrap my head around it, that there's some communities in Miami-Dade County that have done more or less where we're at, which is at the mean. And I wanted to see how they how have they been performing, and how have they been doing that, and how have they been able to survive, and how have they been able to maintain probably an aging system and aging infrastructure the same, if not more so than we have. And I think that question will never be answered, right? Because that would require an in-depth deep dive in every single city, and we're not going to be doing that. You know, we're concentrating on what Miami Lakers need and what Miami Lakers would benefit from. And I see that infrastructure need being greatest in Westlake, because for the things that Carlos said, but like you said as well, the constituent calls that come in. So how can we make that, I guess, help the areas that need it most, but at the same time be sensitive that I don't think we'd be doing anybody a service by quadrupling the rate. You know, I just don't. I don't think that's so. Those are the two things that I'm trying to wrap my head around, and I guess I'll be looking forward to that policy discussion as well. You know, as we go into it. But definitely, what got me today was sticker shock, and you know, and I guess the demons of our past that we never really adjusted for CPI on this rate. Maybe that's really the deeper conversation that we need to have from a policy perspective.
And I honestly, I agree with Louis. It is absolutely sticker shock. And I think part of that problem is we've sort of set this 9-year barometer to get everything done within 9 years. I don't know why it's set at 9 years, but is there a possibility that we can stretch that out? Because, I mean, if you're looking from 2005 to 19, that's 14 years that we didn't do anything, you know? So I think there's a chance for us to maybe stretch it out a little bit to where we get in a position where we can do things, but not triple the rate on our residents.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you look at the map, the needs are tremendous, and that's why we put the options before you, is because of the fact that you guys field all of those complaints. They call you when they when they have their streets flooded. So, yeah. What we're going to end up doing is we're going to tell a bunch of people, because if you go back to the map that Elizabeth had in her presentation, there are a lot of areas that are not even in the next in the master plan. They're in that community-wide plan. So if we stick with just a master plan and we do it, you know, with a lower little by little with a lower fee, there are people that we're going to say, and imagine if that was your street or my street or whoever, we're going to say, you have flooding on your street every single day. Think of the people on 83rd place. And I know that they're higher up in the priority list right now because they have severe flooding. But imagine being on one of those streets, and the answer from us collectively as a government is, we know your street floods, we're gonna get to it in 15 years.
Yeah, I hear you.
That's the reality check that we all are going through. And I understand that it's a sticker shock, and the political ramifications of this are not borne by me. I understand that 100%. That is borne by you guys that have a whole different dynamic that plays out. But ultimately, what we have to tell people is, we may never get to your street, or we're going to get to your street in 15 years. And that, you know, that's a challenge.
I think that we can also work in at some point, if necessary, special assessments. I mean, yes, there's a process involved with that, but that could be also another way of targeting, you know, a particular area that needs it more than another. My concern is that obviously, even if the property tax rate, for example, stays flat, doesn't mean that the amount that you pay is going to stay flat. We know that it increased again this year, which again, you know, helps us out. Not a whole lot, but it does help us out. And then, of course, now we have the franchise fee, which is dipping, but presumably at some point we'll get back to some kind of normal level, right? And we've discussed in the past raising that, you know, for various reasons, to cover litigation costs, to cover repaying some of the funds that we had to basically utilize to cover a $500,000 deficit or whatever it ended up being, right? But the point is that this is what I'm concerned about, is that, you know, the property tax burden is not going down. Now we will be discussing an increase to the franchise fee. And now we're talking about an increase to the stormwater fee. I understand that we have a lot of infrastructure needs that have been unaddressed for too long, that the can's been kicked down the road. But at the same time, I don't know if especially this year, is the time for us to start talking about, catching up. I think as a result of the pandemic, we're kind of in a situation where we need to really, consider the impact on the ultimate consumer here. And the one thing that I've always found, to the extent you can find something like this likable, what I've always found, I guess more of a positive, is that the money generated by this fee is solely for stormwater operations and capital improvements. It's a flat fee. It hasn't adjusted, right? Unlike the franchise fee, which, can be adjusted any which way, and which can be open up until last year when we passed the restrictive ordinance could have been used for any number of other things. In my opinion, we've made the franchise fee better by, adding some kind of controls on how it gets used. And this one already has those built in. But again, I just deeply uncomfortable, not even just from a political standpoint, but just as a policy leader looking after the best interest of my constituents, talking about so many increases back to back, and again, just, I think there are other ways, there are other options, to quote Councilman Collazo, that we have still maybe not fully explored that are worth looking into. I appreciate all the work that our consultant performed on our behalf on this and working with our staff, and as well as Carlos's work on this item. But I just want us also to keep in mind that we're not totally without options either, if we need to address other more pressing needs at a certain point in time. So just want to throw that out there.
Thank you. If I may, I just, I'm usually the voice that doesn't want to raise any fees and the voice that doesn't want to increase anything with regards to charging our residents more. However, this is a priority. This is something that I think is very necessary. It's not something that we want to charge our residents more to get done, but it is something that when the problems occur, this is property damage. This is loss of property value. If your house floods on a weekly basis, these are phone calls that when we receive them, the residents are very distraught when their block is flooding. I myself have that issue in my community, even though our community is private and we can't reach out to the town for help, but this is a priority. So when we look at all the things that we're looking at now, and now is definitely not the time to increase anything. There's still a lot of residents that are out of work and a lot of people that are struggling, but we can't do what previous councils have done for the last 15 years, right? We can't just kick the can down the road and let the next council take care of it. We really need to take a look at this, and hopefully staff can present something that's doable. I mean, the $21 range is definitely sticker shock, but we have to do something, even if it's just a little bit of an increase, so that we can start to raise those funds necessary, because the state has kind of hung us out to dry for the last couple of years, and we haven't received the necessary funding that we truly need to get these projects up and running. If we don't do anything at all, then we're gonna do what all the other councils have done before us, which is just let it be and wait. And at some point there will be something disastrous that will happen, and then someone will have to scramble and pull a loan or do something like that. I think that doing it this way in a much more manageable fashion is the right way to go, and hopefully you guys can present something to us that's a little more tolerable. I did, after we had our last workshop, I did have that $6 and change range in my head. That's kind of where I thought that we were going to end up, but I do see that there are a lot of projects, and that might not necessarily get us there fast enough. Grants are obviously an option that we're always happy to look into, but we definitely have to do something, whether it's not necessarily enough. I definitely think that we need to move forward and increase in some way. Thank you.
Well,
I had one more thing that I just thought of now. Ismail, if you can come back on and explain. I know I cut you off when you were trying to explain the commercial calculation for the stormwater fee, but could you give us an explanation on how the stormwater calculation for commercial property differs relative to the franchise fee, and which one does the commercial bear more of a burden and which one does the resident bear more of a burden?
Hi, Councilman. Well, I mean, in comparison to the franchise fee, the franchise
Yes,
fee is a percentage of the bill of the resident.
right.
I'm not familiar with the commercial side of the franchise fee. I would think
Well, the commercial side of the franchise fee is based on kilowatts, right? So it's 1,000 for every 1,000 kilowatts, it's X, you know, in the bill is usually how the franchise fee was explained to me.
yeah, so it's
What I'd really like to understand is on this stormwater fee, do commercial properties get sort of not a pass, but a reduced amount because they have less impervious area?
no. So if the property is commercial,
Right.
the square footage of the building and the square footage of the parking that belongs to that commercial. Let's say the Grams, they have storefronts, right? They have and they have parkings there for all those stores. Well, they
Right.
have to pay based on the square footage of all of the building, okay? When
Okay.
or whatever it is, and then they have to pay for that square footage of the parking, and that's divided. I think it's by 2,680 square feet. It's in our ordinance, and based on
2,800.
that, and then that's one ERU. How much is it, Carlos?
2,800. I'm looking at it at the
Okay,
code.
so 2,800, and that's one ERU.
That's
And-
2,800. I'm sorry, 2,800 is combined business square footage versus parking lot square footage combined.
Yes. If you go to that plaza, that they have, you take all the square footage of the parking lot and the square footage of the building, and that's, let's say they have 50,000 square feet. Well, that divided by 2,800, that will give you the ERUs.
Got it. So they would pay
I'm sorry,
one unit.
and that ERU is at the same price as the residentials.
Got it.
450.
Got it. So let's say if they had a property that totaled 280,000 square feet, they'd be paying 100 units.
Correct.
Got it. Understood. Okay.
At 450, which is the same as the residential. Now, if you had a 10,000 square foot home, you will be paying one ERU, which is 450 a month.
Got it. Understood. Okay.
All right.
I hope that helped.
I think
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay. I think we got direction. We're gonna work internally to put together a recommendation, and we'll put it before you in a forum where you guys can make decisions, and then you can obviously, without a doubt, amend whatever we put before you if it's not what you're looking for. But I think we have direction from these conversations. Is there anything else to close up the meeting? Council members, anyone? All good?
No, just a thank you to everyone for putting this together for us. It's not to digest, but in the format that you're presenting it, it makes it a lot easier. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah, same from here. Thank you guys. Appreciate the time, and it's been very productive. Thank you.
All right.
I just want to thank Elizabeth for her, working with us throughout this process. I know we went back and forward, crunching a lot of numbers in the table, back and forth. So thanks for bearing with us through this process, and I appreciate your professionalism through this process. Thank you very much.
It certainly was a pleasure working for your community. And if there's anything, Carlos, that we can do to supply data or background information as you go forward, please do let us know.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your evening. And we'll see this issue again.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good
Good night.
night.
Good night.
Good night.